Hi there, I'm Amanda. At my sister's engagement party, while cameras flashed and everyone toasted her future, my parents stood beside her and disowned me, right there, in front of the guests. But that wasn't the worst part. The real betrayal? It had already happened, quietly. Behind my back, they'd forged my signature, sold the house my grandmother left me, and erased my name from every record like I'd never existed. And when I finally exposed the truth, they didn't apologize. They screamed. What would you do if your own family made you feel like a guest at your own life? Would you walk away or fight back? Let me tell you what I chose. I arrived just before sunset, the kind of late April light that makes even the Spanish moss shimmer like gold tinsel. Everything about the venue felt rehearsed, intentional, from the crisp linens to the curated jazz playlist humming through the patio speakers. Southern perfection with a hint of smugness. I knew the moment I stepped out of my car that I wasn't here to be celebrated, but I needed to see it for myself. I needed to confirm they'd done it. The check-in table was decorated with white hydrangeas and those little brushed gold sign holders. One of them read, "Family of the Bride." A young woman with a headset and a clipboard smiled without looking up. "Name?" she asked. "Amanda Kraft." She scanned the list with a flick of her pen. Then she reached into a tray, pulled out a single badge, and slid it toward me. "Amanda," it said. Just Amanda. Below it, "Guest." No last name, no family crest, no ribbon, no title. Not even a hint that I was related to anyone in that room. "Is this it?" I asked as gently as I could. "That's what I was given," she replied, her voice neutral. "Only the confirmed names got full credentials." I nodded, took the badge, and walked in. The ballroom opened onto a long patio facing the water. Paper lanterns bobbed overhead. A trio played light piano covers of wedding classics. A large welcome board displayed in scripted font. "Welcome to the Mendez-Wexler engagement." Below that, in gold lettering, "With love from the families of Jovelyn and Leland." A list of family names followed. I looked for mine. It wasn't there. There was no Kraft listed. Not as part of the family. Not as part of anything. I made my way to my assigned table, table 12, tucked near the far end of the garden. My dinner companions were a local florist, one of Leland's high school coaches, and an older couple who spent most of the evening mispronouncing Jovelyn's name. No one knew who I was, and no one seemed curious enough to ask. I kept my mouth shut and my eyes open. That's something I learned long ago in this family. They notice silence more than noise. At the table next to ours sat a group of women wearing matching silk shawls. One of them nudged another and whispered, "Is that the sister?" The other replied without hesitation, "No, the sister's already inside. That's probably an assistant or something." I didn't flinch. I didn't correct them. Instead, I glanced toward the dessert table and noticed the wine glasses. Each one was etched with a tiny gold crest, the family logo. The same one I designed the summer after high school, when my mother insisted the foundation needed a more serious image. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, sketching versions in Sharpie while she critiqued every line. Now, that symbol sat on every table, every napkin, every photo booth frame, without a trace of me. I picked up one of the glasses and ran my thumb across the edge. The glass felt colder than it should have. The pattern was familiar. Not from tonight, but from years of slow omission. No seat at the gala. No name in the newsletter. Cropped from the Christmas card. Pushed to the back row at my niece's christening with a smile that said, "Hope you don't mind. It's just better for the photos." I used to mind. I used to rationalize it. Maybe I missed the email. Maybe someone forgot to include me. Maybe I just wasn't clear about my RSVP. But this was intentional, clean, executed like a marketing campaign. And that hurt in a different way. Eventually, I made my way back toward the check-in table. The same hostess was flipping through a new list. "I just wanted to ask," I began, keeping my tone even. "There wasn't a family badge for me?" She looked up, startled. I'm sorry. I was just told to prepare badges for confirmed names. If your name wasn't submitted, it wouldn't have been printed. I smiled. Tight, sharp, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes. No worries, I said. Thanks. I turned and walked away before she could say anything else. Back at my table, I placed the name tag face down beside my plate and stared out across the water. The breeze picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of salt and champagne. Inside the ballroom, Jovelyn had taken the stage. The applause rippled as she adjusted the microphone. Her dress sparkled under the chandelier light, ivory and gold, sleek and structured, exactly like her. I stayed seated. As her voice echoed across the courtyard, I whispered under my breath, "If I'm not part of this family tonight, then I'm not playing by their rules anymore." Just as Jovelyn's voice settled into the mic, the chatter around the courtyard softened. Waitstaff paused mid-pour. The breeze stopped stirring the lanterns overhead. It was the kind of stillness that usually comes before thunder. I sat unmoving, my hands folded in my lap, while eyes turned toward the stage. She started with gratitude, charming as always, thanking friends for flying in, praising the planners for bringing her vision to life, and giving a polite nod to the Vexlers, her soon-to-be in-laws. Everyone smiled. Some dabbed the corners of their eyes like this was a royal wedding. And then she pivoted. "To my parents," she said, voice rich and rehearsed, "who have guided me, shaped me, and held me to the highest standard. Without their unwavering support, I wouldn't be the woman I am today, their only daughter." Laughter in the audience. Then applause. Loud, proud, clean. I didn't blink. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd already been sliced too many times to bleed openly now. At my table, forks paused mid-air. One of the women beside me shifted in her chair, her glance flicking between me and the stage. Another whispered to her husband, too softly for me to catch every word. But I heard enough. "Wait, I thought she had a sister." His reply came fast. "Maybe not anymore." I didn't offer them clarification. The applause faded as Jovelyn moved into a story about her parents' first house, how her mother taught her the importance of always being polished, and how her father instilled discipline by making her recite the mission statement of the foundation before each holiday dinner. I knew the story. I'd lived the same nights, eaten at that same table. The only difference? My name had been erased from the version she chose to tell. As she continued, I felt the familiar sensation crawl over me, like being the only person in a room no one believes exists, the kind of invisible that feels intentional. I looked down at the wine glass in front of me. It was full. I hadn't taken a sip all evening. I rarely drink at family events anymore. It dulls the reflexes. I turned my gaze toward the photographer, who had his lens fixed on Jovelyn and our parents seated front row. I watched as he captured a perfectly composed shot of them, holding hands, smiling up at their star. He didn't once pan to my section of the patio. I didn't wave. I didn't stand. I didn't draw attention. Instead, I let my mind wander through recent moments that had felt off, like how I'd been left off the email thread for the charity board meeting last quarter, or how the last family photo in the paper had mysteriously cropped out everyone but Jovelyn and our parents. I remembered a press release for the Foundation's new scholarship program, an initiative I'd proposed, by the way, quoted only Jovelyn as the visionary behind it. A pattern, not a mistake, not an oversight. I had stopped asking myself if they forgot. Now I asked, when did they start deciding I didn't belong? From the corner of my eye, I noticed someone trying to catch my attention. An older woman seated 2 tables over. My father's cousin, I think. Her expression was cautious, somewhere between sympathy and discomfort. When our eyes met, she gave a tight nod and looked away, as if seeing me meant she had taken a side. Even the people who knew better said nothing. Jovelyn wrapped her speech with a flourish, thanking the staff and volunteers, and saying how she couldn't wait to start this next chapter with her incredible fiancé and loving family. She emphasized loving like it was a brand she was pitching. When she stepped down, people rose to clap again, some even whistled. I stayed seated, and in that quiet pocket, I heard my own voice, low, certain. They're not pretending I'm not family. They're declaring it. I placed my glass down, still untouched, and drew in a breath that didn't reach my lungs. The applause continued, but it no longer landed the same. It bounced off me like rain off an umbrella I hadn't asked to carry. Someone walked by and offered a polite, "Aren't you going to congratulate her?" I didn't answer. I wasn't here to perform. The photographer moved to a new angle. He didn't glance in my direction, not even by accident. I watched my parents beam with pride. My mother wiped a tear. My father nodded like he'd trained her for this moment. And maybe he had. They were radiant. They were flawless. They were three. As the music swelled again and guests rose to find the bar or stretch their legs, I stayed rooted. Not frozen. Anchored. They called her their only daughter, I said to no one. Then I added, more to myself than anyone else. Fine. Let's see how their only daughter handles the truth. By the time the guests started drifting toward the dessert station, I needed a moment away from the noise. I stood, smoothed the front of my blazer, and made my way toward the open-air bar tucked beneath the vine-covered pergola. The lanterns overhead cast a warm haze, but it felt like I was walking through fog. Not confusion, just a thick, growing certainty that the version of me they'd curated didn't match the one standing here. As I reached the wine station, I spotted Leland's briefcase sitting on a low cocktail table beside a half-empty flute of Prosecco. He wasn't around, probably inside charming donors, or assuring my parents their future son-in-law knew how to play the long game. But it wasn't the bag that caught me. It was what stuck out of it, a manila folder with a visible tab. My eyes fell on the printed label, Caldwell Trust Holdings, Cape Cod Transfer Authorization. It was upside down, but I didn't need to flip it to know what it was. I knew that font. I'd used it on dozens of internal filings when I handled bookkeeping for the family trust back when they still needed me behind the curtain. The folder had been slightly open, just enough for one page to peek through. I leaned closer, not touching it, not drawing attention. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Then I saw it. My name, not scribbled, typed, centered, Amanda Elise Kraft. And just below it, a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. The A curled too tight, and the loop in the D was wider than it ever should have been. Whoever forged it didn't realize I'd signed legal documents for years. You can't mimic muscle memory with a PDF and good intentions. I straightened up slowly and turned away, careful not to seem hurried. The sun had almost disappeared now, leaving the lawn lit in amber. I took a deep breath and walked past the bartender, who gave me a polite nod, not knowing I'd just stumbled across the evidence that could rewrite everything. At the far edge of the patio, I paused and checked my phone. One new message from Maureen. My cousin. The one who always said she was neutral when it came to family politics. I opened it. Just let her come. Mom said we'll seat her far away. Won't matter. She won't make a scene. I stared at it. No shock, just confirmation. The message wasn't meant for me. But it didn't matter anymore. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I'd accept being invisible as long as they dressed it up in civility. Maybe once, they were right. I locked my phone and turned back toward the heart of the event. Laughter spilled from the tent where a few guests had gathered around Jovelyn. She was telling a story. I could hear the rhythm of her voice, the controlled beats she used when she wanted people to remember something later. That's when things started to click. Not memories, patterns. Like the scholarship proposal I drafted last fall that was announced as Jovelyn's initiative in a glossy brochure. Or the RSVP list from a charity luncheon in March where I wasn't confirmed in time, even though I was the one who'd set up the donor meeting in the first place. And that moment last Christmas when Mom turned to Jovelyn, smiled and said, "At least one of my girls understands discretion." I used to take things like that personally. Now I saw them as bricks in the wall they'd been quietly building, one that kept me out, but never outright shut the door. Until now. I walked slowly toward the back of the venue, where the ambient noise dimmed and tapped open a text thread I hadn't used in over a year. Professor L. Harding, Estate Law, retired. I typed, quick question. If someone forged a signature on a trust transfer doc, and the name's legally protected, what's the cleanest way to prove fraud? A moment passed, then another. No response yet, but I knew she'd see it. Harding was the kind of woman who answered only when she had the right answer, not just any answer. I appreciated that. I returned to the edge of the crowd and stood near a column wrapped in twinkling lights. From here, I had a clear view of Jovelyn laughing beside Leland and two family friends I hadn't seen since high school. She looked relaxed, like someone who'd already edited the story and was just waiting for it to go to print. But I wasn't an extra in her narrative. I wasn't a footnote. I glanced toward the table where I'd first spotted the folder. Leland still hadn't returned to his bag. Nobody had noticed it was partially open. Nobody had noticed that the ink they used to erase me hadn't dried yet. I opened my clutch and slipped my phone inside, then took one last glance toward the dessert station. They'd set out eclairs and pecan tarts, Jovelyn's favorites. She was glowing. They were all glowing, and I was done watching them shine off the light they stole. As I turned to walk away from the garden lights, a voice caught me mid-step. It was chipper in a way that felt rehearsed, too smooth for sincerity. So, are you with the bride's family, or here as a +1? I turned to find a man holding a champagne flute, his bow tie slightly crooked and confidence fully intact. I didn't recognize him, but I knew the type. Leland's side, probably. Someone who mistook politeness for permission. Neither, I said, offering a polite smile without the effort to explain more. He chuckled, unaware, or uninterested, in the awkwardness he'd created. Ah, the mysterious kind. Got it. I let the moment pass and walked away without another word. The interaction wasn't offensive. It was illuminating. Even those outside the family had absorbed the narrative. Jovelyn was the face. I was unplaceable. She was still at the dessert table, her laughter drifting between the tables like perfume. I didn't wait for her to spot me. I made my way to her, weaving through guests who barely noticed. She turned just as I approached, smile still plastered, eyes quickly calculating. "Can we talk for a second?" I asked, steady and quiet. She paused just long enough for me to see the flicker of annoyance before hiding it behind that polished expression. "Sure," she said, following me toward the side hallway near the catering station. No one else followed. No one cared. The hallway was narrow and dim, lined with storage closets and emergency lights. Barely elegant enough for a hotel, let alone this place. It was perfect. She leaned against the wall and took a sip from her glass, not offering me any courtesy. "You used to have my back," I began, "even when you couldn't say it out loud. Did that stop because I stopped being useful to your image?" She didn't flinch. That smile, tight and corporate, never wavered. "It's not about being useful, Amanda. It's about cohesion. You've always wanted something different, something that doesn't quite fit." My jaw tightened, but I didn't break. "Cohesion," I repeated. "Is that what you call deleting people now?" She shrugged. "It's not personal." "That's the problem, Jovelyn. It should have been." She didn't answer. There was nothing left to say in that moment. I'd peeled back enough of her to see what was underneath. Not cruelty, not spite, just a hollow kind of ambition that didn't make room for mess. And I was a mess she couldn't polish. I stepped back. The foundation, the crest, the scholarships, they weren't built by just one daughter. Still nothing. Just that empty smile, like she was standing in for herself. I turned and walked away. No goodbye. No pause for a reaction. Outside the hallway, the party had moved into cocktail chatter and sparklers near the fountain. I headed toward the terrace for air. As I walked past the garden steps, I nearly collided with my father. He looked surprised, then quickly composed. He gave a soft nod and placed a hand on my shoulder. I barely felt it before he pulled it away again, distracted by the sight of a group of guests heading his way. He didn't speak, and I didn't stop. That was always his role. The silent nod, the diplomatic hand. He was never the fire starter, just the one who let it burn and called it fate. He wasn't cruel. He just never stood between me and cruelty when it mattered. I kept walking until the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed into the outer garden. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I opened the gallery, scrolled past the photos from earlier, screenshots, documents, names, and stopped at the image of the transfer form. I tapped forward, attached it to an email, and typed 2 words in the subject line. We move. 2. J. Travers, my lawyer. Sent. Then I deleted the email from my sent box. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need to see it again to believe it happened. I looked up and saw the photographer lining up a shot of Javelin beside the charity board banner. I recognized it immediately. The tagline, the color scheme, the signature border. I had designed that branding kit 4 years ago during a week-long strategy session my mother claimed was just for practice. I remembered the email where she said it would be temporary just to test audience response. Now it was everywhere, permanent, owned. And I wasn't even in the footnotes. I stood still for a moment, then whispered to myself, if they erase me from the credits again, I'll just take back the entire stage. My phone buzzed, but I didn't check it yet. I didn't need validation. I had clarity. The music faded into something orchestral as the lights dimmed across the courtyard. A hush moved through the crowd like a breeze, soft at first, then certain. Screens on either side of the tent lit up, and guests slowly returned to their seats, balancing drinks and half-finished desserts. I remained standing, just inside the shadows, where the glare of the projector couldn't quite touch me. The slideshow began with warm piano music and sepia-tone transitions. A photo of Javelin at 3 years old filled the screen, grinning, frosting on her nose, a birthday hat tipped sideways. Another followed, her blowing bubbles on the front porch, then a ballet recital, then her high school graduation, then our grandmother in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, flower on her apron. I recognized the frame immediately because I took it, not just the photo, the footage, the edits, the transitions, every frame, every title card, every audio overlay. I made that video. I spent weeks compiling it, pulling from dusty albums and unlabeled home videos. The sequence was mine, crafted for a private anniversary project that never aired. One my mother told me was too intimate to share, and yet there it was, playing in full color, rebranded. A scripted title card bloomed across the screen. From Javelin to her future, with love. I didn't flinch. I didn't storm the stage. I watched. I watched them applaud. I watched my work become someone else's applause line. Not because they stole it without knowing, but because they knew I wouldn't say anything. The audience chuckled when baby Javelin tried to put socks on the cat. They wiped away tears when our grandmother kissed her forehead at Thanksgiving. I stood in the back, invisible but surrounded by evidence. And then I saw it. The necklace. As the lights returned and guests offered approving murmurs, I noticed the way the pearls rested against her collarbone. Not just any pearls, they were unmistakable, hand-strung, uneven at the clasp, with one slightly larger bead left of center. I knew them as well as I knew my own name. Grandma gave me that necklace on my 28th birthday. She held my hand and whispered, "You see things clearly. That's rarer than being liked." Months later, Mom claimed she needed it polished for display during the foundation gala. I never saw it again. Until now, Javelin wore it like it had always been hers. I took one step forward, then another. I moved between tables, past smiling guests and empty glasses, until I was close enough for her to see me. Her smile dimmed, not disappeared, just faded like a light someone forgot to replace. She tilted her head slightly. "Amanda," she greeted, casual like we were catching up over brunch. "What's wrong?" I didn't raise my voice. "You know exactly what's wrong," I said. That video? That necklace? You can steal applause, but you can't steal what it meant to me. Jovelyn's eyes flicked toward the nearest group of guests. Can we not do this here? Oh, now it's inconvenient, I said. After you paraded my work and our grandmother's legacy like party favors? She didn't answer, just pressed her lips together, all poise and no weight. I kept records, I continued. Every file, every metadata stamp, every signed note. I didn't speak up because I thought keeping the peace meant something. But peace built on erasure isn't peace. It's performance. Jesus, Amanda, it's a party, she muttered. I nodded. It was. Until someone picked the wrong ghost to dance around. I walked away before she could respond. A couple near the buffet looked over as I passed. One leaned in to whisper something, and the other glanced at the necklace. Their expressions shifted, subtle but real. I didn't need a crowd. I just needed a crack in the illusion. At my table, I picked up my clutch and pulled out a small drive, a backup of the original video. I slipped it inside, zipped it shut, and opened a new message to my attorney. Subject: copyright breach, engagement slideshow. Body: metadata and visual assets attached. Proceed as discussed. I hit send. Across the lawn, a retired board member turned to his wife and asked, "Didn't Amanda create the first brand campaign, back when the foundation was just starting out?" She nodded. "I think so. And that necklace, wasn't it promised to her?" The narrative was starting to ripple, not because I shouted, not because I begged, but because I finally let them see what they tried to paint over. As I tucked the clutch beneath my arm and stepped away from the table, a flicker on the projection screen caught my eye. The slideshow had restarted. But this time, it wasn't curated perfection. The transitions were clunky, the colors were unbalanced, and the faces weren't filtered into a fairy tale. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile either. I knew which version they meant to show, and this wasn't it. The murmur around the lawn quieted as more people turned toward the screen. Forks paused midair. Jovelyn's image faded into a group shot from a summer picnic nearly 15 years ago. We were all there. Me, her, our parents, even Aunt Mavis. But in this version, I hadn't been cropped out. I stood near the folding table, mid-laugh, wearing the same ridiculous straw hat our grandmother always brought to beach days. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was back in the frame. As the screen faded to black again, the lights returned slowly. Some guests turned toward one another, whispering. That's when I heard him. Leland's cousin, I think. Fresh from the bar, a drink in each hand, and no idea who he was talking to. "So, are you with the bride's family, or just tagging along?" He said it with the same clueless ease someone might ask if I liked red or white wine. Not unkind, just careless. I turned slightly. "Depends on which version of the story you believe." He blinked, unsure if I was joking. "Well, either way, you've got a good seat. Looks like you're right in the middle of everything." "Not by accident," I said, and walked away before he could finish whatever polite nonsense he was about to layer on top. I passed the dessert table, half picked over now, and reached for a glass of water. My fingers were steady. The slideshow had done its work. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. I barely made it 2 steps before a hand tapped my arm. Firm. Familiar. It was Maureen. Her smile was gone. Her usual hush replaced by urgency. "We need to talk," she said. "Then talk." She pulled me aside near the edge of the dance floor, just far enough from the crowd. "I didn't know they'd go this far," she began, her eyes darting to where my mother stood, laughing too loud. "I told your mom not to erase you entirely. I told her. Just keep you in the background at least. She said, we gave Amanda enough chances. She made her choice when she stopped cooperating." I said nothing. She's been planning this for months. The trust, the board seat, the video. All of it. Jovelyn didn't even want the necklace, Amanda. It was your mom who said it would be better optics. I let her talk. And when she finished, all I said was, "You saw them change the trust? Maureen hesitated, then nodded. I saw the new documents. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to get pulled into it. I didn't want to lose what I had. I nodded once, slowly. So you stayed quiet. You kept your seat at the table while they pushed me out of the room. She didn't respond. I get it, I said. You chose their silence over my truth, but don't expect me to play that game anymore. I left her standing there. I didn't look back. A few minutes later, I found the photographer by the tent entrance, flipping through image previews on his camera. Excuse me, I said, calm and firm. That family photo you used in the montage. The full version. Where did you get it? He looked up. Jovelyn emailed me the edited version, but I used the one from the Foundation archives for the slideshow. It was cleaner. Why? I smiled, just enough. Because I'm in it, and I'd like to make sure it stays that way. He nodded. Sure, I can send you a copy if you want. I don't need a copy, I said. I just needed to know that someone still saw the whole picture. I stepped back and watched him return to his screen. Then I turned toward the crowd again. There were more eyes on me now, not many, but enough. A few people were whispering. One woman I didn't know mouthed the word sister as I passed. Let them ask. Let them wonder. Because for once, I wasn't the one trying to belong. They were the ones struggling to place me. And that, oddly enough, was power. At the far side of the garden, I caught a glimpse of my mother. She was standing by the plaque mounted near the donation tent, the one with her name etched in silver, and mine conveniently missing. She didn't smile when she saw me. She didn't nod. She just stared. And I let her. Because if they thought I would never fight back, then they never really knew me. The lights dimmed gradually, not all at once. You could almost hear the pause in conversation as guests turned back toward the projection screens lining the reception tent. I stood at the perimeter, between two potted palms, where I could watch everything without having to be part of it. This was always the safest vantage point. Outside the spotlight, but close enough to catch the truth before it got polished. Soft music began again. Jovelyn's voice rang out in pre-recorded narration, warm and practiced. Family is the legacy we build, the story we share, the foundation beneath everything we become. But then the image cut in. Not the one they'd rehearsed. A full-frame photo filled the screen. There we were, years ago, at a community fundraiser in Bar Harbor. I remembered the moment. The humidity, the folding chairs, the lemonade too sweet to drink. Jovelyn in a linen dress, my father holding the raffle tickets, and me, on the far left, holding a clipboard and squinting toward the sun. Except this time, I hadn't been cropped out. I heard it before I saw it, murmurs. A couple leaned forward. One man whispered, "Wasn't she edited out of that version online?" Another replied, "That's the original. I remember. She helped organize the whole event." My heartbeat didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I took a step forward into the light that wasn't meant for me and walked toward the family table. I stopped beside Leland's uncle, Mr. Rosen. He looked at me like someone trying to remember which piece of the puzzle he'd misplaced. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the red envelope. "Could you make sure your legal advisor gets this before the trust signs off on anything Monday morning?" I didn't have to explain what was inside. The envelope was thick, heavy with the kind of documentation that didn't need explanation, just review. There was no anger in my voice, no dramatics, just precision. He took it silently, reading the label on the back. Caldwell Trust, transfer irregularities, supporting documentation enclosed. No one asked questions. I turned and walked back into the crowd just as the slideshow began to glitch. Jovelyn's face froze mid-laugh, then stuttered into a second image, another photo I hadn't seen in years. It was our grandmother, seated between us at Thanksgiving. Her hands folded neatly on her lap. The original version was hung in the hallway of our childhood home for a decade. In the online family archive, I had been cropped out, as if someone had surgically removed me to center Jovelyn more directly. But here, I was there. Fully. Visibly, undeniably, the screen stilled again, and the guests began to shift uncomfortably. Jovelyn stood at the edge of the tent, tension climbing in her shoulders as she crossed toward me. No smile this time. "Why are you doing this here?" she hissed through her teeth. I met her eyes. Calm, steady. "Because you never thought I had proof." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't deny it. "I never stopped documenting," I added. "You just stopped paying attention." A few feet away, Leland was reading something from the envelope. His expression had changed. No longer neutral, no longer engaged. It was the look people get when the foundation under their feet suddenly feels like it might crack. Jovelyn took a shallow breath. "This doesn't need to get ugly." "It already is," I said, quieter now. "But this time, I'm not the one holding the paintbrush." She started to speak, but I turned away. As I walked back toward the edge of the tent, someone brushed past me gently. It was Mrs. Caldwell, a distant cousin on my father's side, rarely seen and even more rarely heard. "You've always been the quiet one," she said softly. "I never realized that meant you were also the one paying attention." I gave her a short nod. "You're not the only one." The slideshow stalled completely now. A technician crouched by the projector, fiddling with cords. The host cleared his throat into the mic, voice a bit strained. "We'll resume shortly. Please enjoy the hors d'oeuvres in the meantime." No one moved. The air had changed. Something invisible had shifted, and we all felt it. Not because of a confrontation, not because of a breakdown, but because for once, the cracks were showing, and no one had the time to patch them before the light came through. I stood at the perimeter again, this time not hiding. Across the tent, my mother whispered something to a staffer. My father stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Jovelyn didn't follow. She couldn't. Because for the first time in years, they weren't the ones telling the story. I was. The applause had faded into awkward silence. People sipped their drinks just to fill the space. Napkins were twisted in laps. Eyes darted around, searching for cues on how to behave. But no one looked toward me. Not directly. Not yet. And then Leland stood. He didn't rush. He didn't clear his throat or gesture for attention. He simply stepped away from the head table with something firm in his hand. The envelope I'd handed off earlier in the evening. It wasn't dramatic, and that's what made it powerful. "I've been listening," he said, loud enough for the tent to hush again. "And watching. And reading." Every head turned. "I've heard this family talk about legacy, about tradition, about image." He glanced toward my mother, then back to Jovelyn, who was still seated beside an untouched glass of white wine. "But the truth is, what I've witnessed tonight isn't integrity. It's image control dressed up as family values." Jovelyn shifted in her seat, eyes narrowing. She didn't speak. Leland's voice didn't crack. "You erased your sister. You edited her out of pictures, out of programs, out of everything. You assumed no one would ask, that no one would care, that she wouldn't fight back. But you were wrong. No one clapped. No one gasped. Just stillness. The kind that only happens when everyone knows they're witnessing something final." He looked down at his left hand, twisted the engagement ring from his finger, and placed it gently on the table in front of her. "This marriage would have been built on silence, on someone else's erasure. I'm not comfortable building my future on that." And with that, he walked out. Jovelyn didn't call after him. She didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, watching the door as if waiting for someone else to make the next move. They didn't. The playlist that had been running beneath the slideshow cut out halfway through a string quartet. One of the servers knocked over a stack of cocktail napkins as they scrambled to reset something near the bar. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Teresa stood slowly, glanced at the people near her, and attempted a smile that didn't hold. "Let's not let one moment ruin the evening," she said to no one in particular. But the spell had broken, and it wasn't coming back. Guests began to rise, not to mingle, but to leave. Some offered polite goodbyes to my mother. A few nodded toward me with expressions they couldn't quite read. One couple whispered something I didn't catch, but I saw the way the woman gestured toward Jovelyn, then toward me. Outside the tent, I stepped into the cooler air near the gravel path that wound through the venue's garden. A young server passed me, then turned around and hesitated. "Ma'am?" he said. I turned to face him. "I saw your name on the vendor forms," he said. "You helped organize some of this, right?" I nodded once. He gave a small, genuine smile. "I just thought it was classy. The layout, the lighting, even the flower pairings. We work a lot of these, and this one felt different." My throat tightened, not from emotion, but from something cleaner. Validation. Not from a headline or a social media post. From someone who had seen what I built, even if they didn't know the whole story. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you probably realize." He nodded again, then continued back toward the kitchen tent. I walked along the stone path toward the main entrance. Inside, someone had unplugged the projector. The tent was half lit now, flickering with leftover candlelight and discarded ceremony. I opened my clutch and pulled out the small badge I'd been given at check-in, the one that read Amanda Guest. I hadn't worn it. I hadn't needed to. I walked to the stone ledge beside the main gate and set it there, face up. Then I turned and didn't look back. They could keep their version of the story. I didn't need to be included anymore, not in the photos, not in the credits, not even in the next family holiday card, because I had something better. My name, my voice, and the choice to walk away with both intact. As I stepped into my car and pulled the door shut, I didn't exhale in relief. I breathed in, full, intentional, free. "They can keep the crest," I whispered. I kept my name. By the time the headlines started circulating, quiet but clear, I had already crossed into Maine. The news didn't need my name to be understood. People filled in the blanks themselves. They always do. The drive from Savannah to Bar Harbor took 2 days. I didn't rush. I stopped in small towns, stayed at roadside inns, let the map guide me more than the clock. I passed through long stretches of pine and silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty. It listens. I reached the house just before dusk. It stood quiet and bare, the shutters drawn closed like folded hands. No porch lights, no fresh paint. But it was still here, still mine. The key turned easily. I hadn't touched the lock since the legal transfer finalized, but my hand remembered the motion. I pushed the door open slowly. The air inside smelled like cedar and something else. Dust, yes, but also lemon oil. Familiar, soft, alive in a way that no gala ever felt. No one was waiting for me, and that was exactly what I needed. I walked from room to room, flipping on lamps, not overhead lights. The kind of lighting that doesn't announce, but welcomes. My shoes left faint impressions in the old rugs. I didn't disturb anything that didn't want to be touched. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer on the left, one my grandmother always called her just-in-case drawer. Rubber bands, old receipts, a flashlight, half-used birthday candles. And then I saw it, tucked beneath a stack of folded linens. An envelope, aged around the edges. My name in cursive on the front, the handwriting unmistakable. For Amanda, when the time is right. I sat at the table to open it. Inside, a single sheet. Ink faded slightly, but steady. A message written without flourishes. Just the truth in full sentences. They may not remember what you gave, but the house will. You were always the one who stayed after others left. This place is yours, not because of a name, but because of your care. That's the only legacy that matters. I didn't cry. I folded the letter, gently, and placed it beside an old photo of us. It wasn't framed. It had been tucked in a book of crossword puzzles. I remembered the day it was taken. Her in a sun hat, me in cut-off jeans, both of us holding iced tea like it was holy. No one else in the frame. That was rare. That night, I didn't unpack. I made a cup of tea, sat on the porch, and watched the tide roll in under the moonlight. I didn't need noise. I needed breath. I needed space not to explain, but to exist. I opened my laptop, not for emails, not for the Foundation's unraveling timeline. I started writing a proposal. Nothing fancy, just a concept draft for a residency, short-term retreats for women cut off from their families. Not therapy, not charity, just space to breathe, to be, to remember their names before someone else rewrote them. This house doesn't need to prove anything, I whispered to no one, but it can still protect someone else. I sent the draft to a friend who ran a nonprofit out of Vermont. Her reply came less than an hour later. Absolutely, we'll co-fund the pilot. Let's get this off the ground by fall. No posturing, no applause, just action. Meanwhile, in Savannah, the Foundation issued a statement. Cold, indirect. The board will be restructured pending further review. No admission, no names. But the donors read between the lines. Javelin's brand metrics dropped by 20% in 1 week. My mother quietly stepped down from 3 advisory boards. Whispers grew, louder than any press release. I didn't return calls. I didn't go back. A few months later, a postcard arrived at the Bar Harbor house. No return address, just 10 words in sharp, narrow print. You were right, I just wasn't ready to see it. No signature. But I knew the hand. I didn't answer. I placed it in the drawer beside the letter, not out of spite, not to hold on, just to remember. One late afternoon, as the first fall guests arrived for the residency, I met them at the gate. They were nervous, holding duffel bags and too many apologies. One of them asked, "So who built this place?" I smiled and held the door. "They don't ask who built the house," I whispered later that night, alone in the writing room. "They just thank the one who opened the door." I stood barefoot on the wood floor, feeling the grain under my skin. I looked toward the wall where my grandmother used to hang postcards from places she'd never been. Maybe I wasn't erased. Maybe they were just blind to the ink I used. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's a form of strategy. And walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing peace over performance. I used to think being erased quietly was something I had to accept, that dignity meant never raising my voice. But I've learned something. It's okay to speak. It's okay to protect what matters. And most of all, it's okay to outgrow the version of yourself that kept trying to fit into rooms that were never built to hold you. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, if you've ever watched someone else take credit for what you built, if you've ever had to choose between being polite or being whole, I want you to know, you're not alone. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to let go of someone to finally find yourself? Or maybe you're still holding on to the hope that one day they'll see you. Tell me in the comments. Let's talk about it. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't, that's okay too. Tell me why. Let's have a real conversation. This channel is a space for stories that reflect real struggles, hard-earned wisdom, and the kind of healing that doesn't always make headlines but matters deeply. So if you're still here, and this story resonated with you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And we're just getting started. End of story.